Over 2,000 years ago, in ancient Greece, a blind poet known as Homer, along with the most famous authors, playwrights, and historians of their day, would record the tales known to us as Greek mythology. They would speak of the great heroes of the land, the mighty gods of Olympus, and the mortal men and women who were unfortunate enough to get in their way. But who was Zeus, and why did he wage war against his own father and send a great flood to wipe out humanity? How was mankind created by Prometheus, and why were the horrors of the world unleashed from Pandora's box? What awaited the souls of the dead in the realm of Hades, and how were monsters such as the Hydra, the Cyclops, and Medusa slain by famous heroes? From the 12 labors of Hercules to the Trojan War, this is the entire story of Greek mythology. In the beginning, there was only chaos, a great void of emptiness. But from the chaos sprung Gaia, earth, as well as Eros, love. They were then joined by night and day, who would put an end to the reign of Erebus, darkness, with the eternal cycle of dusk and dawn emerging. Lastly would come Tartarus, the deepest depths of the world, where condemned souls would be sent for punishment. But these would not be the only primordial beings to emerge, for Gaia would birth one more, Uranus, the sky. The two would unite and produce 12 children, 6 sons and 6 daughters. These children would be known as the Titans. But Uranus was a cruel father to the Titans, locking his children deep within the earth. To escape, they would look to their mother, Rhea, who fashioned an indestructible sickle she gifted to her youngest and strongest son, Cronus. Cronus would patiently wait, and when Uranus next came to lie with his mother, he would jump out and slice off his father's genitals, which fell into the sea. From them would spawn Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Having defeated his father, Cronus would take his place as ruler of the world, but his reign was not to last. Cronus had been informed that one of his children was prophesied to overthrow him, so he would swallow them each whole as they were born. Only one would escape this horrible fate, Zeus. Saved by his mother, Rhea, Zeus was hidden on Mount Ida in Crete, while Rhea fed her husband a rock dressed in infant clothing. When the time came, Zeus would return, striking down Cronus and releasing his siblings from his father's stomach. With his brothers and sisters now at his side, Zeus would wage war for 10 long years against the Titans. He released the Cyclops, legendary craftsmen who would forge Zeus a mighty thunderbolt, Poseidon a trident, and Hades a hat of invisibility, turning the tide of the war. With the Titans defeated, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades would decide what realm each would claim. Zeus received the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. Taking up home on Mount Olympus, they would become known as the 12 Olympians. While the gods now ruled Earth, Prometheus, one of the only Titans spared, was not satisfied. He saw only beasts, and so Prometheus would fashion man from clay, sculpting his new creation in the image of the gods. But man dwelt in darkness, so Prometheus gave them fire, a great primordial flame that allowed them to fashion tools and rise from the caves. But Zeus was not happy. He punished man by taking away the fire. Wanting to save his creation, Prometheus stole the fire back from the gods. Furious, Zeus chained Prometheus to the side of a mountain. Each day, an eagle would feast on his liver, only for it to grow back each night, continuing his suffering for eternity. But Zeus was not done, and wished to punish humanity further. He asked Hephaestus to craft the first woman, Pandora. Pandora was given a sealed box, forbidden from ever opening it, but her curiosity turned into a burning desire. Finally, she could resist no more. She peeked into the box and outsprung all the evils of the world: greed, envy, old age, and disease. By the time she closed the lid, there was only one thing remaining inside: hope. Later came the Age of Bronze, where man became arrogant and vicious. Appalled by man's lust for war, Zeus decided to unleash a great flood to wipe humanity from the earth. Poseidon struck the ocean, and the waves eclipsed the tallest mountains. Only two survivors remained, Deucalion and Pyrrha. They drifted to Mount Parnassus, the only place the oceans had not consumed. To bring back their fellow man, they threw stones behind their backs. The stones thrown by Deucalion grew to men, and those by Pyrrha into women. And so it was that humanity was born once again. Zeus, the king of the gods, ruled from his throne on Mount Olympus. He was considered the greatest of the gods, but he was famous for his infidelity. His first wife was Metis, whom he swallowed to avoid a prophecy, leading to the birth of Athena from his forehead. His second wife was Themis, with whom he fathered the three Fates, the goddesses of destiny, who spun the thread of life. Finally, he would take his sister Hera as his queen. But even after his marriage, Zeus's lustful eye would wander. One day, he saw Europa, the princess of Tyre. To hide from Hera, Zeus transformed himself into a magnificent white bull. Mesmerized by its beauty, Europa climbed upon its back. The moment she did, Zeus sprinted into the sea, carrying her to the island of Crete. To commemorate his love, Zeus would recreate the image of the white bull in the stars.
Hera, wife of Zeus and queen of the gods, was the protector of marriage and women, being deeply respected in Greek society. Although she was revered, she was also one of the most vengeful and spiteful gods on Mount Olympus, making her a poor match for her husband Zeus, whose numerous affairs would constantly draw her anger. Despite being his queen, Hera would only bear him 2 of the 12 Olympians, Ares and Hephaestus, with the other gods coming from Zeus's numerous affairs. One of Zeus's most insulting acts of infidelity would be with the princess Io, one of Hera's most devoted priestesses. When Hera came to investigate, in an attempt to protect Io from his wife, Zeus would transform her into a beautiful white cow. But the queen of the gods was not fooled. Knowing that she had caught Zeus red-handed, she would demand that he give her the white cow as a present. Zeus saw little choice but to accept, with Hera locking Io in a cave where she would be guarded by the 100-eyed monster known as Argus. The perfect guardsman, Argus could sit with half his eyes asleep and the other half awake, never breaking his watch. Pause. Zeus would eventually send the messenger god Hermes to free the miserable Io. A master musician, Hermes decided to defeat Argus not through strength but through wit. he began playing his pipes and singing sweet lullabies until Argus began to fall asleep. As the 100th eye finally shut, Hermes would take out his sword and slay the beast, releasing Io from her prison. To thank Argus for his service, Hera took his eyes and set them in the tail of the peacock, her favorite bird. Io would eventually arrive to the Nile in Egypt, where Zeus would restore her human form. She would become the ancestor to many of Greece's greatest heroes, including Perseus and Hercules. Pause. Leto, yet another of Zeus's lovers, would experience the full extent of Hera's jealous rage. After finding out Leto was pregnant with twins, Hera sent the great serpent Python to torment her, forcing Leto to flee across Greece. Only the island of Delos was willing to offer Leto refuge.
After 9 days and nights of agonizing labor, Leto would give birth to 2 children, Apollo and Artemis, who would grow up to become fully fledged gods of Olympus. Upon the birth of the twins, the city of Thebes hosted great celebrations. Yet Queen Niobe, whose beauty was matched only by her arrogance, mocked Leto. Boasting to all who would listen, Niobe argued that since she had 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters, she was superior to Leto, who had only 2. Upon hearing the insult, Leto was furious. She sent Apollo and Artemis to enact her revenge. Raining down arrows from above, Apollo would kill each of her sons and Artemis every daughter. Niobe would flee to her homeland, crying uncontrollably. Taking pity on the queen, Zeus would transform her into a great stone, forever ending her suffering. Apollo, the youngest twin, was the god of archery, light, and music. He was also closely linked with prophecy. Traveling to Mount Parnassus, he would slay the great snake Python with countless shots from his golden bow, constructing a great temple where its body fell. This site would become the home of the famous Oracle of Delphi, known as the Pythia, who would deliver the god's prophecies to kings and farmers alike. Following his victory, Apollo was filled with pride. Seeing Eros, the youthful god of love, holding a bow, Apollo would laugh at the child. Filled with rage, Eros would swear revenge. He fired a gold-tipped arrow at Apollo, causing him to fall madly in love with the nymph Daphne. But at Daphne, he fired a lead-tipped arrow, ensuring she felt nothing but disgust for Apollo. As Apollo chased her through the woods, Daphne cried out to her father, the river god, for help. Slowing to a halt, her skin turned to bark and her hair to leaves. Where a young woman once stood was now the first laurel tree. Mourning his lost love, Apollo would carry a laurel wreath wherever he went. Artemis, goddess of the hunt and twin sister of Apollo, was a deadly archer. A sworn virgin, she was quick to anger. When the hunter Actaeon accidentally stumbled upon her as she lay bathing, the goddess was quick to punish him. Turning Actaeon into a deer, she set his own hunting dogs upon him, with the hunter suffering a horrific death. Poseidon, brother of Zeus, ruled the seas. Known as the Earth Shaker, Poseidon would create earthquakes and storms. But he would grow tired of Zeus's rule. Alongside Athena and Hera, Poseidon attempted to dethrone Zeus,
but failed. As punishment, he and Apollo were forced to build the giant walls of Troy, walls that would later withstand the force of Greece's mightiest armies. Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, decided to compete with Poseidon for the patronage of a great city. Poseidon struck the ground, creating a stream of salty water, but Athena planted the first olive tree. Deeming Athena victorious, the city took her name, becoming known as Athens. Athena was also a master weaver, but when a young girl named Arachne boasted she was better weaver than the goddess, Athena challenged her. Although Arachne's work was perfect, Athena, furious at her arrogance, transformed the girl into the first spider, destined to weave webs for eternity. Athena, the goddess of love and beauty, was responsible for sexual attraction. She was often accompanied by Eros, whose arrows could charm any creature. For one man, Narcissus, love became a curse. Blessed with beauty, but burdened by vanity, Narcissus rejected all lovers, including the nymph Echo. To punish him, the goddess Nemesis lured him to a pool. Seeing his own reflection, Narcissus fell in love with himself. Unable to look away, he wasted away and died, transforming into the Narcissus flower. But while some died for love, others created it. Pygmalion, a sculptor, carved a statue of a woman so perfect that he fell in love with it. He prayed to Aphrodite, and the goddess brought the stone to life. The statue became Galatea, a woman of flesh and blood, ending Pygmalion's loneliness. But while Aphrodite helped lovers, she was also jealous. The princess Psyche was so beautiful that men worshipped her instead of Aphrodite. Furious, the goddess planned a terrible revenge, involving her son Eros and a beast.
Furious that none were paying her attention, Aphrodite would call upon her companion, Eros. She demanded that he use his powers to make Psyche fall in love with the most vile and despicable man on the face of the earth. But when Eros went to carry out her instructions, he too would be struck by Psyche's beauty. Falling deeply in love for the first time, he refused to follow Aphrodite's commands. However, as Eros refused to strike any man with love for Psyche, she grew sadder and more lonely as the years went on. Finally, she turned to the Oracle of Delphi for help. Following the oracle's instructions, Psyche traveled to a magnificent palace where it was said her husband would come to claim her. But the servants warned her new husband was a secretive man. He would only visit her in the dark of night, and she was never allowed to ask for his identity, nor look upon his face. Overjoyed with her new life, Psyche spent every day in the palace's beautiful gardens. But one day, she was overcome by curiosity. Taking an oil lamp, she lit it in the early hours of the morning. Looking down, she was overcome with joy. Her husband was none other than Eros, the young and handsome god of love. However, in her excitement, Psyche lost her grip on the lamp. Hot oil fell onto Eros' shoulder, causing the god to awake in fright. Disappointed that Psyche had failed to trust him, Eros told her the marriage was over before flying back to Mount Olympus. Distraught, Psyche visited Aphrodite, begging for a chance to see Eros once again. But Aphrodite had not forgotten her hatred. She laughed in delight, setting the girl an impossible task. If she wanted to see her husband once again, Psyche should travel to the Underworld and ask Persephone, the queen of the dead,
to place a fragment of her beauty in a golden box. Traveling to the underworld, Psyche came to the river Styx. After paying Charon's fee, she was ferried across its dark and haunting waters. Arriving in the throne room, Psyche approached the Queen of the Dead. Persephone was happy to assist, placing a fragment of her beauty within the golden box. But as Psyche began the trip back, she was overwhelmed by curiosity once again. She lifted the lid to look at the beauty contained within. But such things were not meant for mortal eyes. Psyche fell to the ground, enveloped by a dark and endless sleep. It was at this moment that Eros, moved by the lengths Psyche had gone to find him, flew down to earth. He used one of his arrows to save her from the grip of eternal sleep. Returning to Olympus, Zeus arranged a great wedding celebration, granting Psyche the gift of immortality. And so it was that Psyche, whose name means soul, became a goddess. In her union with Eros, love and soul would now be forever linked.
The god of smithing and the son of Zeus and Hera, Hephaestus had a difficult start to life. Born lame, his mother Hera threw him off Olympus into the sea to drown. Surviving the fall, Hephaestus would later return to take his revenge. He crafted a golden throne for Hera that would not allow her to stand back up. Zeus secured her release only by gifting Hephaestus the goddess Aphrodite, the most beautiful Olympian, as his wife. Hephaestus became a great inventor. He fashioned the palaces of Olympus, Athena's breastplate, Hermes' winged helmet, and Helios's chariot. Some of his most famous works were the bow of Eros and the magnificent armor of Achilles. Ares. Ares, the god of war, delighted in battle and the slaughter of men. He was hated by mortals and gods alike, representing unrestrained rage and cruelty. Ares had a long-term affair with Aphrodite, the wife of Hephaestus. When Hephaestus found out, he was furious. He forged an invisible net to hang over their bed. When Ares and Aphrodite lay together, they were trapped naked beneath the net, unable to move. All the gods of Olympus were called to see, with laughter ringing out through the heavens. But Aphrodite was not the only lover of Ares. He also had an affair with Eos, the goddess of the dawn. Jealous, Aphrodite cursed Eos with an uncontrollable lust for mortal men. Eos fell in love with Tithonus, a young Trojan prince. She begged Zeus to make him immortal, but she made one fatal mistake. She did not ask for eternal youth. As the years went on, Tithonus withered away, crushed under the weight of age. Eventually, Eos transformed him into the first cicada, an insect known for making noise during the dawn. Hermes. Hermes, the messenger god and patron of thieves, was known as a trickster. Aided by his winged helmet and sandals, he delivered messages between Olympus and the underworld. He also acted as a shepherd for the dead, guiding souls to the afterlife. One of his sons was Pan, the god of nature. Born with the legs of a goat, his mother fled in terror, but the gods adored him. Pan fell in love with the nymph Syrinx, who transformed into water reeds to escape him. Using the reeds, Pan created a set of pipes, naming the instrument the panpipes, which he carried wherever he went. Dionysus. God of wine and parties,
Dionysus had an unusual birth. His mother, Semele, died seeing Zeus in his true form. Zeus sewed the unborn baby into his thigh until he was ready to be born. Dionysus became the symbol of pleasure, creating wine to bring joy and euphoria to his followers. One day, King Midas saved a friend of Dionysus. In return, the god granted him a wish. Midas asked that everything he touched turn to gold. At first, he was overjoyed, but soon he realized his mistake. His food, his drink, and even his own daughter turned to gold at his touch. Begging Dionysus to revoke the gift, Midas washed his hands in the river Pactolus, becoming a normal man once again. Demeter. Demeter, the goddess of farming, ensured the harvest was rich and the land fertile. But her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades to the underworld. Grief-stricken, Demeter refused to let anything grow, plunging the world into famine. To save humanity, Zeus intervened, but Persephone had eaten a pomegranate seed in the underworld, binding her to Hades. A compromise was made. For 9 months, she would live with her mother, bringing spring and summer, but for 3 months, she would return to the underworld, creating the cold, barren season of winter. Hades. Hades, brother of Zeus, was lord of the underworld. He did not command death itself. That power lay with Thanatos. When mortals died, Hermes guided their souls to the river Styx. There, the ferryman Charon waited. Only those buried with a coin could pay for passage, while others were left to wander the shores for 100 years. Crossing the river, souls passed the 3-headed dog, Cerberus, who guarded the gates. 3 judges would then decide their fate. Souls were sent to one of 3 places: the fields of asphodel, for those who lived average lives. After 1,000 years, they would drink from the river Lethe, forgetting their past and being reincarnated. Elysium, a paradise for heroes and virtuous. Here, souls lived in eternal bliss. And finally, Tartarus, the deepest pit of fire, reserved for the worst criminals and those who offended the gods. It is here that the Titans remain imprisoned, watching as new souls enter the realm of the damned.
This would be the only place where Hades would become involved, with the god himself designing and overseeing each soul's punishment based on their previous crimes. For the Danaids, 49 sisters who had each killed their husbands, Hades forced them to fill a tub with water to cleanse them of their crimes. But as the tub would always leak, they would spend an eternity trying to fill it. Ixion, the first man to murder a family member and who had grown lustful for Zeus's wife, would be bound to a wheel of fire that would spin for the rest of time. Whereas Tantalus, a man who had killed his son and stolen from Zeus, was cursed to eternal hunger and thirst. He would stand in a pool of water with the branches of a fruit tree hanging above him. However, as he went to quench his thirst, the water would recede, and as he went to eat, the branches would rise out of reach, forever leaving him in a state of agony. Sisyphus. But of all the punishments, the most famous would be given to Sisyphus. Having cheated death multiple times, Sisyphus would pay the ultimate price for tricking the gods. Every day, he was to roll a boulder up a steep hill, only to have it slip from his grasp as he neared the peak. Having to start over again and again,
Sisyphus would suffer his punishment for the rest of time. Places of the Underworld. Although Hades would have complete control over the underworld, his realm was so vast that he had to enlist the help of the Furies to carry out his punishments. But they would not only be confined to the realm of the dead. The murder of a family member was considered so terrible in Greek society that even those still alive could not escape Hades' wrath. They would be hunted down and tormented by the Furies, 3 sisters from the underworld, who would not stop until they had avenged the dead and driven their target insane. It would be the underworld they called home, resting here before their everlasting torment of the human soul began once again. Traveling across the underworld would lay the fields of mourning, a resting place for those who had spent their life pursuing love only to be rejected. The anguish they felt would condemn them to this dark and haunting forest, where they would forever mourn the love they never had.
In the far corner of the underworld lay the land of dreams, an island accessible only to the gods of Olympus. Ruling over the island would be Morpheus, the god of dreams, who each night, when all were asleep, would, alongside his 2 brothers, control the dreams of not only mortals, but the gods too, either granting them pleasant visions of the future or haunting them with the worst of nightmares. So powerful was Morpheus over the unconscious mind that he would be used to name the drug morphine, a pain medication renowned for sending its users to sleep. The true seat of power, however, did not rest in the land of dreams, for the underworld had only one ruler, the mighty Hades, who lived in a grand palace deep within the earth. Hidden away on an island engulfed by fire, those who searched for his home without an invitation would become lost in the dark and winding halls of the dead. Orpheus. But while the underworld was filled with punishments, Hades and Persephone were not cruel rulers. They would take pity on mortals who found their way to their kingdom. Orpheus, a famed musician and poet, had fallen in love with the beautiful Eurydice. But on their wedding day, Eurydice would be killed by a snake bite, with Orpheus left alone in despair. Grieving and desperate to see his wife once again, he would decide to travel to the underworld to retrieve her. Arriving at the river Styx, he would take out his lyre and play a beautiful song for Charon, who was so moved that he ferried Orpheus across the water for free. Upon reaching the other side, he would be confronted by Cerberus, with the tune he played so sweet that the 3-headed dog would be lulled into a deep sleep. Finally, he would reach the palace of Hades and Persephone, playing for them a song about his lost love, Eurydice. With tears welling in his eyes, Hades would take pity on Orpheus and agreed to release her soul, but only on the condition that Orpheus refrain from laying his eyes on her until they were both out of the underworld. Overjoyed, Orpheus would agree and began to lead his bride through the dark and winding halls of the dead. But as he neared the surface and the daylight shone upon his face, he would be overcome with excitement, turning around to look at his wife. But Orpheus had not yet completed the journey, and so as his eyes fell upon her, Eurydice would be dragged back down into the realm of death, never to return. It was a lesson to all Greeks in the virtues of patience and restraint. For if Orpheus had resisted temptation when his goal was so close, Eurydice,
the love of his life would have been with him once again. The Age of Heroes. With the gods having established control over the world and the realm of the dead, the Age of Heroes would soon begin. Warriors from across the land embarked on great adventures that would become legend. The House of Cadmus. The first in this generation of heroes would be Cadmus, the brother of Europa. Cadmus would spend many months searching the land for his sister, but as she had been abducted by Zeus, her location would be impossible to find. Desperate for information, Cadmus would make his way to the Oracle of Delphi, but she would inform him that her sister was lost forever and not to dwell on her absence. Instead, she would tell Cadmus the gods had special plans for him. He was to follow a sacred cow and found a city upon the place where it came to rest.
Following the oracle's instructions, Cadmus would find the cow nearby, following it for days into the region of Boeotia, where it finally lay down to rest. He would found the city of Thebes. This would become one of the greatest cities of ancient Greece, rivaling the likes of Athens and Sparta for power and influence. To sanctify the city and receive blessings from the gods, Cadmus intended to sacrifice the sacred cow to Athena. But when Cadmus sent his companions to collect water from a nearby spring, they would find the spring guarded by a ferocious dragon who slew them as they tried to escape. Hearing screams, Cadmus would run to the spring, only to find the dragon devouring his friends. Taking a spear, he would lunge forward and impale the beast, with the dragon unleashing a terrible scream as it took its last breath. Little did Cadmus know that the dragon was sacred to Ares. By killing it, he had committed a crime against the god of war. Ares would spare his life, but would force Cadmus to serve him as a slave for 8 years before his actions could be forgiven. But for Ares, his troubles would not only be confined to earth, for on Mount Olympus, Hephaestus, the god of smithing, had discovered one of Ares' deepest secrets. Hephaestus was married to Aphrodite, but she had not been faithful, having an affair with Ares. The romance had lasted many years, with Aphrodite secretly bearing Ares a child called Harmonia. When she came of age and Cadmus had finished his many years of service, Ares was so impressed by his devotion that he would offer his daughter Harmonia as a bride. Hosting a great wedding celebration in Thebes, the two would wed. But Hephaestus, having just found out his wife had had an illegitimate child, would present Harmonia with a cursed necklace, a beautiful necklace that would bring misfortune to any family who possessed it. Unaware of the curse, Cadmus and Harmonia would go on to rule the city of Thebes for many years, enjoying a long life and having 5 children together. Yet soon, the curse of Harmonia's necklace would bring ruin to the house of Cadmus. Their youngest daughter, Semele, would be the first to suffer tragedy. Having spent a night with Zeus, Semele would fall pregnant with the god Dionysus. But the cursed necklace would soon bring misfortune, with Semele bursting into flames when she saw Zeus's true form. Her sister Ino would also suffer misfortune, with her husband Athamas going insane and killing their children, with Ino herself jumping to her death while trying to escape him. The third daughter of Cadmus, Agave, would give birth to a son named Pentheus, who would become the second king of Thebes. But Pentheus would make a deadly mistake,
deciding to ban the worship of his divine cousin Dionysus in the city. In revenge, Dionysus would drive all the women of Thebes into a frenzy, who would tear Pentheus limb from limb, with his own mother, Agave, ripping off his head while under Dionysus's spell.
And finally, Autonomy, the last daughter of Cadmus, would be mother to the hunter Actaeon. He would be transformed into a deer and devoured by his own hunting dogs after he accidentally saw the goddess Artemis bathing in the forest. With the necklace of Harmonia being passed from generation to generation, the curse of the house of Cadmus would continue. However, the curse's curse would torment one man in particular, Oedipus, the seventh king of Thebes, whose tragic story would bring tears to the eyes of all who heard it. Oedipus. The son of King Laius and Queen Jocasta of Thebes, Oedipus would face hardship from the very beginning of his life. His father, Laius, the city's sixth king, had consulted the oracle of Delphi about the future of his lineage, but the prophecy he received would not be to his liking. It was foretold that he would die by the hands of his son. And so, when his first son was born, Laius would bind his feet, hanging the boy on the branch of a tree to die. But a shepherd would soon stumble across the helpless child, retrieving him from the tree and taking him home to safety. As the child's ankles had been damaged, he would name the infant Oedipus, meaning swollen foot. Wanting the best for the child, the shepherd would deliver Oedipus to the king and queen of Corinth, good people who could not conceive a child of their own. Oedipus would experience a happy upbringing in Corinth, but as he reached manhood, he would begin to wonder about his true parentage. Making his way to the oracle of Delphi, he would ask who his parents were. In reply, the oracle only warned him to stay away from his homeland. Otherwise, he was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified by the prophecy and believing that it referred to his foster parents, Oedipus vowed to never again return to the city. Instead, he would travel to Thebes, which, unknown to Oedipus, was the true land of his birth. On the road to Thebes, Oedipus would come to a narrow junction where a large chariot blocked his way. But the chariot's passenger, an impatient man, would speed past Oedipus, knocking him off the road while hitting him on the head with a stick. Furious, Oedipus would chase after the chariot, killing all those on board, including the elderly man who had struck him. Unknown to Oedipus, he had already fulfilled the prophecy, as the old man lying dead at his feet was none other than his true father, King Laius. Continuing his journey, Oedipus would reach the gates of Thebes, only to discover that the city was plagued by a monster, the Sphinx. Sent there by Hera to punish the city, the Sphinx would ask anyone wishing to enter or leave the city a simple riddle. What animal has 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? None had yet solved the riddle, and those who failed would be killed and eaten by the Sphinx. The rulers of Thebes were so desperate to get rid of the creature that they offered the throne to anyone who could kill it. Approaching the monster, Oedipus would be asked the riddle. But after thinking long and hard, Oedipus would finally give his answer: man. For in the morning, man is a child, crawling around on all fours.
Then, at noon, in the prime of his life, man walks on just 2 legs. And finally, in the evening of his life, man walks with the aid of a 3rd leg, a walking stick, to help him keep balance. Shocked by her defeat, the Sphinx would jump off a tall rock to her death, with Oedipus entering the city of Thebes as a hero. Being crowned, he would also be gifted the recently widowed Queen Jocasta as his wife, with the two having several children together. But unknown to Oedipus, he had just married his own mother, with the prophecy now complete. The two would live together happily for a time, but it was not to last. The gods cast a plague upon Thebes as punishment for the crimes of patricide and incest that Oedipus was still unaware he had committed. With the plague getting worse by the day, the shepherd that had saved Oedipus as a child would finally reveal to him his true identity. Horrified by the revelation, Queen Jocasta would hang herself. Overcome with grief at the death of her mother and wife, Oedipus would take the golden brooches from her robe and blind himself with their sharp pins. Disgusted by the revelation, the people of Thebes would exile Oedipus, with only his daughter Antigone choosing to accompany him. Blind and poor, he would spend his remaining years wandering the land as a beggar. The only comfort he received was knowing his daughter was by his side, with Oedipus dying an old man, having realized that no mortal can outrun their fate. His story would resonate throughout the ages, inspiring the works of Sigmund Freud, whose Oedipus complex would propose that every young boy would lust for their mother while feeling resentment towards their father, Perseus. But although the house of Cadmus was the first great heroic family, a new line of heroes would soon emerge. For there was another kingdom that sat between the great cities of Athens and Sparta, Argos, ruled by King Acrisius. But Acrisius had been informed by a terrible prophecy by the oracle of Delphi, warning him that his grandson, soon to be born, was destined to murder him. It would not be long until Zeus, having seen the king's daughter Danae, would be struck by her beauty, sneaking into her room as a shower of gold. With the gold falling upon her, Danae would fall pregnant, soon giving birth to a son she would name Perseus. But King Acrisius, terrified that the prophecy was coming true, would banish them from his kingdom, locking them in a chest and letting it drift out to sea. Traveling for days and nights at sea, they would soon arrive upon the shores of Seriphos, where they would be discovered by the fisherman Dictys. Dictys would raise the boy as his own, with Perseus soon reaching manhood on the island. But not all would be well, for the fisherman's brother, King Polydectes, had also noticed the beauty of Danae and desired her as his wife. But she was always protected by her son, Perseus, who never left her side. Wanting to have Danae to himself, King Polydectes would look to find a way to get rid of Perseus. Hosting a great feast, King Polydectes would invite guests from across the island, with each man expected to bring a horse in tribute. But Perseus, having no money to his name, instead boasted he could easily deliver the king a greater gift, the head of Medusa. It was the opportunity Polydectes had been waiting for, ordering Perseus to collect the head. Not expecting the king to take up his offer, Perseus would set out in despair, having only heard the terrifying tales of the creature that awaited him, Medusa. But Medusa had not always been a terrifying creature. The daughter of the sea gods Phorcys and Cato, Medusa was one of 3 sisters renowned for their unrivaled beauty. the only mortal sister, Medusa would also be the most beautiful. But despite this, Medusa would dedicate her life to Athena, taking a vow of celibacy so she could serve as her priestess. However, one day while she was walking by the sea, the god Poseidon would be struck by her beauty, following her back to Athena's temple, where he would force himself upon her. Furious at the act performed in her sacred temple, Athena would place the blame on Medusa for allowing herself to be defiled and breaking her vow of celibacy. Wielding the power of the gods, she would curse Medusa, distorting her once beautiful faces into a hideous visage. Where her long and flowing hair had once been was now a tangled web of snakes, and where her eyes had once seduced any man would now turn those who looked upon them to stone. But Medusa's sisters, who came to her defense, would not escape Athena's wrath, with each of them transforming into hideous creatures, becoming known as the Gorgons. Exiled from their homeland, the three sisters would find a new home in North Africa. But their troubles would soon continue, for warriors from across the world would come to hunt them for sport. As the years went on and their loneliness continued, the hate they felt for the outside world would begin to grow, with Medusa and her sisters killing any who came near.
Taking Medusa's head from his bag, Perseus held it out before him, turning the soldiers to stone. Panicking, the king ran for his spear, but it was too late. Perseus held Medusa's head before him, forever immortalizing his terrified expression in stone. Finally reunited, Danae embraced her son, thankful that she would no longer have to live in fear. Leaving the island behind them, Perseus, Andromeda, and Danae decided to return to Argos, the place of Perseus's birth. But before he left, Perseus returned his gifts to the gods. Athena took Medusa's severed head and placed it on her shield, a final punishment for her former priestess, remaining as a symbol of Athena's dominance and power. Returning to Argos, Perseus was hailed as a hero. All the townspeople encouraged him to join a local athletics tournament where he could compete against some of the strongest men in Greece. With the event underway, it would soon be his turn to throw the discus. Spinning with all his might, Perseus forgot his own strength. The discus flew off into the crowd, killing a member of the audience. Running over to the body, he discovered that it was none other than his grandfather, King Acrisius, laying dead on the floor. And so, just as the prophecy had predicted so many years ago, King Acrisius had died at the hands of his grandson, a lesson that no mortal can run from their fate. But having shed the blood of a family member, Perseus was no longer able to stay in Argos. Instead, he founded his own kingdom, Mycenae, which would soon become the most powerful city in Greece. Its great walls were constructed with massive boulders, too large for any man to lift alone, with Perseus enlisting the help of the mighty Cyclops. Ruling over the city, Perseus and Andromeda would have many children together, but unknown to them, one of their descendants would become the most famous hero of them all. For the son of Zeus and Alcmene would be the great hero Hercules, whose famous 12 labors would echo throughout every corner of the world.